What's up, fam? Welcome to the channel. This week on the podcast, I got to interview a young woman named Rachelle Nelson. We talked about her chronic illness and how that impacted her writing style, why she even wrote a book, and some of her characters and what they go through. I also learned that she's a part of a band with her husband and how that was something that impacted her writing style while writing the book. So that was pretty cool to learn. Lastly, we talked about books. We talked about books that she likes to read, books that she likes to write, her writing style, and then, of course, we talked about her debut novel called Sky of Seven Colors. In this book, we follow a young woman named Meg. Meg is an introvert, but also she's someone who is on a journey of learning who she is, who she wants to become, and how she wants to respond to the world around her. In her story, we learn of a young man who's her best friend and how he falls into a deadly coma. Because of their relationship, Meg would do anything to save him, and she whispers this in the forest one day. What she didn't recognize or realize is that the forest was going to talk back. So she gets taken to a whole new world. Like, I'm talking a real new world. And this world is completely void of all color. Because Meg is human and has lots of color, she becomes a priceless commodity that the royalty would like to use. So I'll leave that plot there for you. Without further ado, let's start the podcast. And I really hope that you pick up this book. Love you guys.
Bye. Hi, Rachel. Is that how you say your name, Rachel?
Rachelle, but I will answer every single time because my whole
Perfect. I thought so. I actually wanted to call you Rachelle, and then my brain blinked. But anyways, Rachelle, nice to meet you. My name's Addison. Yeah. Yay. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really loved your book. I thought it was super unique. The Sky of Seven Colors is the rainbow, right?
Yeah.
It's about the rainbow, right? So I thought that was a unique way of saying that. That's so cool. And I didn't catch it until the end of the book. So that was funny. But yeah. Let's see, what do I have for you? Oh, something that I noticed on your website is that you said that you are in a band with your husband. That sounds super fun. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called Nelson at the Helm, like the steering wheel of a ship. So some nautical themes there.
Yeah.
And I started it, gosh, I think the year we got married, so we've had it for a long time. I've had some ups and downs with chronic illness. In 2020, I was diagnosed with an active brain tumor. It's not the kind that kills you, just the kind that makes you really, really sick. And that was actually good because then I was able to get some treatment. But for a few years there, we weren't able to do any music at all, and I just focusing on getting better. But we're back into it right now. So last year we released a full-length album, and then we've been just playing tons of shows, and we have like a band that we play with and stuff. So I sing. We do like duet vocals, and then Jared plays guitar, and we write songs together. So yeah, I was always doing, and so then. And writing little songs, and that's kind of how Sky of Seven Colors actually started, because I wanted to write just a song that would be like magical and like fantasy themed, and so I started writing that, and those are some of the poems that you'll see throughout the book that are prophecies in the story. So.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's cool. Okay, nice. Okay, so my first question for you is, who was the most challenging character for you to write?
Challenging character. I think for me, it's always like the challenge. That was my first book I ever wrote, so they were all challenging. But side characters, like that was a challenge. And my first draft, a lot of them just didn't really have like a personality or motivation. And so just to go back through and think these are real people in a real world, or at least you have to think of them that way, right, to write a story. And so, yeah, just giving them, like, I think of like Garlean, who's one of the servants in the palace or in the king's house. yeah, like she was a little bit of a challenge of like, how does she fit in here and what would she be thinking?
Mm,
And just the regents in general, I feel like were balanced because I didn't want them to be all evil. But I definitely wanted them to have some cultural issues, but I didn't want them to be considered completely villains. And so I feel like that was a tricky balance, yeah, to match. So,
okay, nice. Do you have a favorite character that you liked writing?
um, you know, I love them all. I think Prost is probably everybody's favorite. And I based
Hmm.
on all the nerdy boys that I've ever known that love to monologue, and a little bit myself because I can be a know-it-all and monologue sometimes about things too. But I really loved Vaughn's character a lot. How
Mm,
she she doesn't always understand and can't always relate, but she still just has a really big heart, and so I loved writing her.
yeah. My favorite was Meg, probably because I could relate to her humanness.
Yeah.
Um, I always like to think that if I was stuck in a fantasy world, I would be like the one that's like, yes, let's do this, like the heroine. But I definitely, the older I get, the more I realize that I complain a lot and I'm kind of wimpy. So it was nice to have a character that was kind of always questioning things. Even like she's always like, why? Why would we do that? Right? And so that was like, it was interesting to have her point of view.
Yeah, and obviously I'm not the first person to do that. If you look back at The
Oh,
Hobbit,
yeah.
he's a small person in a big world,
Yeah.
trying to overcome his fears and get outside of his smallness. But I think what has happened a lot in modern fantasy is that we always want to have the strong female character, because we want to show that women
Mm,
are strong. But I don't necessarily relate to that. Like I'm not super physically strong. I have like chronic illness. And so I've kind of thought the same things. Like I love reading about these fantasy worlds, but how would I even survive? And like what things would I do to try to overcome? And so some of the things Meg has to do don't seem like that big of a deal, but to her they're a big deal. And I think that's kind of how all of us are in our lives. Sometimes there can be things
yeah.
like we were talking about the dentist earlier, going to the dentist that seem
Can be a
small, but
big deal.
be a big deal to overcome. So I wanted to write somebody like that. And also I loved getting to write that for the majority of the story, she's actually sick and struggling with illness.
Mm,
And obviously healing was really heavy on my mind and my heart when I was writing the book. And that's a big theme in the book. And so, Meg in the end, it's a temporary illness, I guess, not to spoil anything, but it's temporary. But just to have a character that's not just like off fighting wars and off fighting battles and super good at like bows and arrows and everything, but that
yeah.
has these limitations, but still pushes through and still has adventures anyways, and still does amazing things was really, it was encouraging for me. I needed it as I wrote it during 2020. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So was Meg inspiration from your life, from you, or was there a different person?
I think it's a little bit me, and I do youth ministry, or I have for years and years, and so
Mm,
a little bit some of the teens that I've worked with over the
yeah.
years, the things that we all struggle with and relate to. I made Meg an introvert. She has a hard time relating to people, and that comes into play when, of course, she's the center of attention in this big world that she enters
Mm,
into. And that's not me at all. I love to talk to people. I love to be the center of attention. I like to perform. And so there's things that I don't relate to her with, but I have always struggled with like OCD thinking my whole life. I was actually diagnosed with it when I was like in college. And so I put a little bit of that into Meg too. And that definitely comes from me. Yeah, holding on to specific things and having specific fears. And so I had fun watching her have to get pushed outside of her comfort zone.
mm, mm. Nice.
Yeah.
So, where did you find your inspiration for the book as a whole?
People always ask me that, and I don't know how to answer. I think I have like a really wild imagination. I have really crazy dreams every single night. I don't know why. I just have my whole life like really huge like adventure dreams. And so I wake up and I tell my husband, I'm like, I dreamed last night there was this castle, but you only had to speak Spanish to go through the door. And if you didn't speak Spanish, you couldn't go through the door. like all these like crazy things that happen. And so I think it started a little bit with a dream, a little bit with a poem that I wrote. And I always loved the idea, like stories about like magical creatures that would find their way into our world, like, like the classic story of like the girl that finds the unicorn. And I think something that was interesting to me was to think about humans are actually really amazing creatures. Like God made us so cool and our bodies are so amazing and we can do so many things. And maybe in another world we would be a magical creature to them. And so it kind of started with that idea a little bit.
Mm,
That's literally what is so special about Meg is just her humanness, because it's something that they don't have, they don't know about, they don't have access to, and obviously that's amplified through magical causes in the story. But yeah, it's kind of one of the ideas that went into it.
yeah. So is that kind of where like the lack of color came from too?
What would be in our world that we is like incredible that we take for granted on a regular basis?
Mm,
Color. Just imagine if it didn't exist. And that probably comes a little bit from like watching what is it called? Oh my gosh. I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden. The Wizard of Oz. There we go. Growing up.
mm,
Um, and to think about, like, I always feel like Dorothy didn't react enough to going from a completely black and white world. And I don't remember if that was in the book or if that's just the movie, but she goes from a completely black and white world to a completely colorful world. And I'm like, you would be like, what even is color? Like, if you didn't have a concept of color, you probably couldn't even imagine it. You know what I mean? So, and then The Giver also, they live their whole life not being able to see
yeah.
it. Like they're awakened to it. And so just thinking about how magical that is and what if for people who'd never experienced it before, it actually had properties beyond what we understand in our world. So it's kind of become a magic system.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. You're gonna like make me see the world differently for the next week.
There's no such thing as an ugly color. So he's an artist, and he's like, even like you think of like a poop brown in the right context, it can be like a really beautiful, rich, deep, chocolatey brown color. It's just sometimes the
Mm,
word for it. So like
yeah.
single color that's ugly. They might be ugly together, but
Mm. Wow, that's a great way to look at the world. Okay, so you have some super unique names in your book, like Calmus, Fawn, Prose. Where did these names come from?
yeah. So there's the two cultures that are juxtaposed against each other in the gray earth. There's the croppers, and they are more connected to the land and it's a little bit more um, natural feeling and simple people. And then there are the regents, and they are more in tune with their magic. They are more cerebral. They write a lot and keep a lot of histories. They can see into the future. Their powers are more industrial, and so I think that's a little bit inspired by the Dark Crystal for that because I always loved the Dark Crystal and the two races that were split and then put back together.
Mm,
But this is a little bit different because they're not split. But anyway, so for the croppers, I wanted all of their language and their names to be like more simple, more clipped, short, easy. And then for their regents to have it be like a little bit more elaborate. And so maybe they are
mm,
a little bit more like French, with they're sounding or Italian or something more romantic. And then the croppers would be more like tribal Germanic, I guess. So
mm.
that was kind of my thinking, I guess, as I wrote it. Maybe not even consciously, but just subconsciously.
Mm. Nice.
It's fun
Do
to
you have a yeah. Do you have any advice for inspiring authors?
Ooh, any advice for aspiring authors? Um, I guess just write and write words. Educate yourself. There's so many resources out there. When I was wanting to write my first fantasy novel, I didn't study writing in school. I didn't write growing up, nothing like that. But I did go and take Brandon Sanderson's fantasy and sci-fi writing course, which you can take for free on YouTube, which is an amazing resource. But yeah, there's so many good craft resources out there. There's amazing communities out there. So write a lot of words, but don't stay in your little writer introvert bubble because there's so much that we can learn from each other and really research
Mm,
stuff, put yourself out there. and be willing to maybe get outside your comfort zone a little bit. So
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's the most common advice, is saying just right.
I
Because
know.
we just don't start sometimes, right?
That's what Neil Gaiman says. He said, you just write, maybe this is a paraphrase, but you just write one word after the other. It's really that easy and it's really that hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So were there any like spiritual or meaningful significance to your story?
Yeah, I didn't write my book for a Christian market, but I am a believer. I believe in God. I read my Bible, and so of course it's going to influence my worldview. And so I definitely saw it come out as I was creating the world and kind of discovering it, and how the gray earth was really created where people are given these beautiful gifts and they're given for a purpose, and then a lot of the plot revolves around what happens given this gift, and then you break it. You don't use it for its intended purpose, and you go away from the original design. And so, of course, it's coming from a place of me believing in design, and then watching that even in the brokenness be redeemed. And so yeah, that's a big, I guess. And then the concept of like just faith, like just believing that there is a plan that's bigger than maybe what we see, and that all things can be worked for good, even the things that look the very worst. So those were some of my themes in my heart, I guess, as I wrote it.
I love that. I feel like we already kind of like covered this one, but is there anything else you would like to add about like what the Gray Kingdom may represent?
Oh, what the Gray Kingdom may represent. I'm curious why you asked that question. Was there something that you thought?
Um, well, I feel like I have to read a book a couple times, but I don't know. There's always something that seems hidden, right, in books that have deeper meaning or purpose, instead of books that are kind of just written from a fun perspective, right? They're written from a perspective of having like value and purpose, and so I'm always curious what your thoughts were when you were writing that part. Like, for me, I was trying to see if like maybe the Gray Kingdom was the spiritual realm, or maybe the Gray Kingdom was a realm where Meg had to go and learn how to appreciate her own realm, right? So those were kind of two of my ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, as far as like the lessons Meg has to learn. I think something that was in my mind as I was writing too is just like how uh, authority can be a really like beautiful thing, but when it's corrupted, how dangerous it is. And I think I also wanted something to really highlight the vulnerability of being human and the vulnerability of being a woman, right? Because those are some of the things that put Meg in a lot of danger in the other world. And so it's just kind of heightened. Like those are real things that we women face in the real world, but it's just heightened in the story.
Yeah.
So it kind of represents power and danger, and maybe also some temptation too, right? Because Meg, while she wants somewhere to belong, more than anything, she doesn't want to be alone, even though she doesn't want to be around a lot of people. So it's like a lot of young people, right? They want to belong and they want to have friends, but they want to stay at home and watch their TV shows and read their cozy books, and we've all been there. But anyways, so she goes to the great earth, and it's this place of great belonging, right? Everybody there wants her. But there's a difference between being wanted and being loved. And so it's a little bit that juxtaposition of her, recognizing the value that she already has, even just of opportunity of being part of the human species. So.
Okay. Yeah. As I was thinking and listening to what you're saying, something that I was thinking by the end of the book was that it kind of felt like she was stepping into a Bible story. It was giving me like Saul vibes, or yeah, was it King Saul, right? No, the one that David had to go after. Do you remember his name? That's King Saul, right?
You got
Okay.
it.
I'm not good with names. Um, but it's definitely giving me those vibes of someone who had a gift, but he took his gift and used it for selfish purpose, and that's really ultimately what led to his corruption and downfall. So I guess that's kind of where that question was coming from too, was because it kind of felt like she was stepping into a parallel Earth to ours, but maybe at like a different time frame, you know?
A little bit like it has a similar creation story, but almost like took a different path than our world took.
Yeah, but
Um,
I don't, it's okay if you didn't write it that way. That's just what I got.
like a lot of the Renaissance artists, maybe not a lot, but like Michelangelo and stuff would talk about how when they would carve a statue, it almost feels like they're uncovering something rather than they're actually making something. Like they chip away the stone and they find the person underneath, the statue underneath.
Mm,
And it feels like that when I write, even though, of course, the artist is the one creating the shape and the form of the person that they're carving. And of course, my mind is creating the story, but sometimes it just feels like I'm discovering it as I'm, as I'm writing it. So it may come from my subconscious, it may come from who knows where, but I'm
yeah,
kind of discovering it and finding out about it too. And that's a part of the joy of writing for me, is because I want to find out what happens next. And I want to find out about this weird world that I've stumbled across in my own brain, I guess. Uh,
mm, yeah,
so maybe not all of it's intentional, but definitely with Calmus. I don't know if you've ever encountered a narcissist in your life, and I think we throw around that word too easily, but I've had a few of those people in my life that um, they can appear just so generous and so giving, and can do really amazing things, but it can come from a motivation that's actually really destructive in the long term, and what that does in relationships. And um, yeah, I also feel like sometimes in books we really glamorize like the dangerous boy or like the dangerous man. So I kind of wanted to have a love interest where it was, yeah, I guess not to ruin the book, but just to show some of the dangers of that. So, yeah.
yeah. I gathered immediately that Calmus was very manipulative. But he kind of was like subtle with it, right? So it still felt like he was kind, but it didn't feel like a healthy kind of kind, you know? So
Yeah.
I definitely
How
gathered
much
that.
likes Calmus as they're reading the book is a test for me of how healthy their boundaries are in
Yeah,
relationship. If you're in love with him, you might need to evaluate something.
he might not be the one girl. Okay. So, um, hold on. I feel like we also answered this one too, but maybe you might have something else you want to add. But was there any like purpose in Meg's personality that you might have missed that you want to add?
Purpose in her personality. When I first wrote her, I tried to write her like a real teen, and I've taken lots of teens on missions trips and camps and things. And life is hard when you're 17. Like it's just you're figuring everything out for the first time, and you're learning so much, and so much is being thrown at you, and you're just figuring out what it is to be an adult. And so I feel like the first iteration of the book, like the first draft, she was way too whiny, like way too much.
Oh, okay.
I had a lot of people like, I can't relate to her, like, or I don't like her. I don't like her because she's annoying. And so finding that balance of like her going on an adventure and being willing to face her fears and being willing to love others, but not and and yet still having real reactions, but not to the point that is gonna like annoy readers. So I feel like I had to
Yeah.
mature a bit. Be like, actually, this might be more like a 25-year-old maturity wise. No offense
Mm,
to any of the teens
no.
out there, are some very mature teens that
Yeah.
they're. But anyway,
Well, yeah. It's hard. I feel like we do this in movies too. It's hard for you to have a teenager. We just watched this one show called Never Have I Ever, my mom and I, and she's a total teenager. And it's hard to watch what she's going through. Because it's like she's kind of a mess, right? So it is hard to find the balance between portraying a teenager and what they go through, but also not making them so annoying that you can't relate to them. Not saying anything about real life. It's just hard to watch that, you know? Like you have to find a balance with watching it.
Not so aspirational that they're perfect that you can't relate, and then not so understandably like frustrated to the point where you can't get through the story, and somewhere in
Yeah.
between there. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
I would probably react like that too, and yet I want to see somebody that overcomes. It encourages me to be more courageous. It encouraged me to be more courageous writing the book. So
Yeah. And I feel like you have to have a character growth, right? That's part of like I can't tell you how many reviews you see that they're like, well, this character didn't grow at all and that was super annoying, so I didn't finish the book, right? Or like people who have watched Gilmore Girls and they really just don't like that they continue to make the same choices throughout every season, you know,
Gil-
and like don't really grow, right? So,
yeah, like Gilmore Girls was like a negative character arc, like where we started out so pure and so much potential, and then kind of like went downhill as it went. So
yeah. Yeah, I agree. That was hard to watch. But also like Lorelai, she had room to grow, but it doesn't feel like she grew as much as she could, you know? So, I mean, I didn't finish it, so I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I felt like in the
or
beginning.
watch the new ones that they came out with. It was just so hard.
Really? Ah, bummer. Huh, okay.
Hard
Um,
out there if you love them. But I feel like that's pretty universally agreed upon that the original series is better than the new like movies that they came out with.
mm, yeah, I feel like that's most things. No one likes the sequels.
What kind of things are you reading and watching right now?
Me? I am currently reading, oh goodness, I'm reading the Ravenspire series by C.J. Redwine. And then I just read Dust by Kara Swanson. It's a
Okay.
very good book. Very good. And then, I don't really have time to watch a lot of TV right now, but I'll watch like an occasional movie with my husband. So we just watched the Lego Batman movie. He
Oh,
loves that
that's
movie.
classic. That's so good.
How about you?
Um, right now, I always feel like a little nervous about recommending stuff because I always want like just my brand with my like author brand is to keep things like very clean and very much so like a younger YA
hmm
reader would be able to like appreciate something. And um so I don't know because I haven't finished this book yet if it is appropriate, but I'm reading The Night Circus right now. And he's
Mm,
the author, but it's super magical and fun and you
yeah.
know wizard rivalry and circuses and um, set maybe I don't actually know when it's set. Maybe kind of a Victorian era. It seems like,
Yeah.
but I just started it. So I'm really enjoying that. I just read Divine Rivals, and that one was a little bit more mature than I would usually recommend, but it was beautifully written. So good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books I've read in a while.
Yeah.
Then oh gosh, what else? I've been, I don't know, if somebody asks you and then you blank, huh?
Yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, I've never read anything in my whole life.
All the time.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think Night Circus is considered an adult book
Oh, is
based
it?
on like, yeah. But I also had a friend read it and she said there wasn't a lot of content in it that was concerning. So that's good. I do know that it was the book that inspired Caravel, and that book is considered a clean young adult book. There's no cussing or anything. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's on my list, so I'm excited to read that one too.
yeah. I liked Once Upon a Broken Heart better, but that's just me personally. There's just a couple like things that she chose to do in Caravel that I was like, I'm not here for it. But everyone can form their own opinion. So yeah. And there's like trying to think of Yeah, Once Upon a Broken Heart was kind of more like that magical fairy tale. There's like a lot of like hope and light and fluffiness, and then some dark parts. Whereas Caravel is definitely like much darker than I would anticipate, but it was still pretty good. So, yeah.
I tried to read, just thinking about like light versus dark stuff, Six of Crows recently, and I know people love that one, and I couldn't get into it because it was just so like all the characters were pretty like grim. Like I couldn't find the one to like latch onto. But I think it's probably
Mm,
book. It just showed me a lot about like my taste in books more than anything else.
yeah.
Whereas like I read what is it called, Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson recently, and it was weird because they have like a really similar plot and vibe where it's this crew coming together to do this heist in kind of a grungy underground criminal fantasy realm. Um, but of course, Brandon Sanderson's is going to be like uplifting and hope filled, and then the other one, as far as I went about halfway through the book, and I haven't finished it yet. But anyways, so I'm not trying to diss on if any of you guys love Six of Crows, but anyways, it just kind of showed me. I was like, I definitely have a vibe that I go for when I read for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I have to have at least one character that um has like a hopeful or optimistic outlook, at least one. Even if it's more realistic, I can't have a whole like group of characters that are pessimistic just for like my own personal personality. Because I notice when it's just so heavy that way, it triggers my depression, and then I'm like, I don't need that. So I have to have at least one that is at least realistic to optimistic. At least one. So I agree. I like the more lighter ones.
What's one of your all-time favorites?
Uh, All-time favorites.
Just one of them,
Mm,
not to be the end all be all. That's too much pressure.
I just read a book called Dreams Lie Beneath, and it
Ooh,
was very good. Very good. So,
is that a nautical themed book?
no, actually, it's about a girl who is considered a dream warden, and her skill is that she protects people from nightmares that come to life every full moon. And yeah, and it's because there's a curse on the land because they murdered a duke, and then the duke, as he was dying, he cursed these seven people to never die and never dream. So now everyone else in like the towns that are around it, their nightmares come to life every full moon, and then people have to like fight them and protect them with their skills and magic. So that one was really good, and I liked how it ended. Um, but I think my all-time favorite book ever is A Soul as Cold as Frost by
Um,
Jennifer Croft. I love that book.
That's so good. I just did a big giveaway with Jennifer Croft.
Yeah.
I have a book box
Oh,
literally right next to me. It's all packaged up, so I won't show you, but that's going out to a reader that entered with her book. And she actually recommended my book. So, what is it called? Endorsed. So she is right on here. She said, gorgeously creative, wholesome, and completely immersive. Jennifer Croft.
aw, yeah,
So yeah, I discovered her just when I was looking for like more faith-based fantasy series, and she's
yeah,
amazing. She's a really cool person too.
yeah, yeah. I got to in school, she like helped answer some questions over email for something I was doing, and I just love her. But she doesn't do any like videos or podcasts or anything because she has kids and she can't get away from them right now. So maybe one day.
That would be
But
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
awesome. I really loved that book too. I would
Yeah.
only ask somebody to endorse my book if I really liked theirs. So I read
Yeah.
it now. I'm reaching out to her. She's amazing. So
Yeah. So what's your all-time favorite book?
again, all-time favorite, like the end all be all. It's too much pressure. Some of the ones that I've just been like obsessed with for years and years. I tend to like things that are a little bit more classic, and I think that's come across in my writing. Maybe too much, where I'm trying to modernize myself a little bit and read a little bit more contemporary. Um, but I loved growing up this book called East by Edith Patel, and I read it several times as an adult, and it's a retelling of East of the Sun and West of the Moon, which is the
Hmm.
story of the polar bear king. So it's a lot like Beauty and the Beast, but in the end, the girl has to go fight for the beast instead of him fighting for her. And it's very adventurous, and the girl gets to do all kinds of cool actiony stuff, and I loved that growing up.
Hmm.
And also just really, yeah, like sacrifice for somebody that she loved, which I think was really beautiful. But it's written with a bunch of letters back and forth between siblings. And so there's a little bit of epistolary in there. And then it's got the perspective of the polar bear. And it's just super good fairy tale. So I tend to love fairy tale retellings. One of my favorite authors recently that I've just been obsessed with is Melanie Sellier. I don't know if you've read any of her stuff. And I don't know how many books she has out, maybe like 30 or something like that. But they're mostly fairy tale retellings. And they're just like so sweet and so whimsical. And her characters are so good. And they have just like the most satisfying little happily ever afters. And they're really cute how, like, I guess cute isn't the right word because they're a little bit deeper than that. But it's like in this kingdom where there's the one true king over it, which of course is God. And then he sends fairy godmothers to come help, and they're angels. And so these angels will show up periodically. And so one minute you're like just enjoying this like fantasy adventure, and there's always like assassins and stuff like that. And then the next second you're like crying about some spiritual truth that she like brought through. And if you haven't read Melanie, I'm like obsessed with her books. They're so good. My mom got on them and read like all of them, and then my mom and I have been like nerding out together over Melanie.
Yeah. What's the first book called?
The first one that I read by her is The Princess Companion, and it's a retelling of the Princess and the Pea.
Oh, Princess Companion. Cute. Okay.
It sounds way more like grade school than it is. It's not. It's actually really sweet romance. So
Yeah. Well, sometimes a name, you can't judge a book by its cover, right? Um, Great. So what I heard earlier is that your favorite types of stories to write are kind of more like that fairy tale feeling. Would you say that's something like the whimsy, or is it just like the way that it makes you feel? What makes that your favorite type?
yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm more interested in people's personal stories than I am in things like geopolitical issues and macroeconomics and stuff. And of course, I care about those things and where they intersect with people. And so my stories are just going to be more people focused, which tends to be more fairy tale. So I'm not going to usually write about a war, but I will write something that has very personal stakes. For instance, the next book that I'm releasing, which I don't think I'm allowed to talk about a ton because I just announced my signing, and so, but I guess I'll just talk about it. It's post-Roman occupation Germany.
Mm.
Um,
Oh.
when there's like Frankish tribes and city-states established there, so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of that a lot of people talk about, but we don't really go into that much. It's really just about our main character and her family and this dragon that they interact with, and how that changes the destiny for all of them. And so yeah, I think I'm just more people focused.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. I read a book by Francine Rivers called The Voice of the Wind, and it's about the occupation of the Romans right after Jesus died, I think. It's like 40 years after he died. Um, but they go into the Germanic takeover too with the tribes. So,
Really after that, once Germany started to kind of get their independence back, and the Roman Empire started to shrink down, and things were like pretty wild during that time, and just yeah, just the Wild West, man. But yeah,
yeah. Well,
much
I'm excited.
super interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited to read it. Why did you choose to write clean fantasy?
Clean fantasy. Ooh, that's a loaded word, right? Some people don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they kind of feel like when you say that it's clean, you're implying that something else is dirty. But just because my
Yeah.
world, I do believe some things are clean and some things are unclean and some things are dark and some things are light. So yeah, I wanted to write something that I would feel good about my nieces reading and
Yeah.
my younger self, and something that would just be good stories. I don't even like the terms like no spice because I'm like it's got spice. spice, just not that kind of spice. Like it's an exciting
Yeah.
story. Stories that don't need a lot of gimmicks in order to attract readers or to engage you. Some things that are like common to all people. And then, yeah, I guess just stuff that's going to be good for people's brains. So,
Yeah. I think when I think of like this type of writing, I think of how it's going to affect my brain throughout the rest of the day. Sometimes there's just books that are so heavy that they impact how you think and how you speak, right? And so for me, when I think of like clean fantasy, I think of something that's going to impact me in a way that's going to help my day be bright and full of life instead of something that impacts how I speak to others, you know. But also, I just think that you have to learn how to balance that stuff, right? So I don't know. That's what I feel about clean fantasy. Like it's just something that helps you. It has a it has a deeper kind of way of telling a story. No. But yeah, that's I don't know. That's how I like to view it.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, life isn't always like fluffy and happy and good
Yeah.
all I do think it's good to like focus on things that are good, in general. But there can be books that deal with issues in ways that are helpful to people. And I think I'm not even opposed to writing about sex. I think it's something that's super common in the human experience. It's something that people need to talk about. It's something that even teens probably need to talk about. It's just how it's handled. Like I remember I read a couple of books when I was a teen that dealt with things like assault. I don't want to get
Mm,
I need to be careful what I'm saying because I don't want to get this like taken down off of any platforms. But and just the idea of like what that means for a teenager, and just kind of intersected with those things that maybe would be like deemed inappropriate by some parents, but I feel like it's actually good for me to like get my mind around it because nobody's really talking with me about those things. And it handled it in a way that I was helpful and healthy, I think.
mm,
But that's just probably not my author brain, so it's not probably something that I would write about, but it's not something that I think is um,
bad.
like nobody should ever write about it. Like we need to talk about sex. It's a real thing, just in the right context.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way you said that. I think another important point is to point out how you respond to it, like as a character in the book, because there's healthy ways to respond to it, and then there's unhealthy ways. And just like learning how to write those things and explain them in a way that would help someone even just like heal from what they've been through. Redeeming Love is a very heavy book,
Yeah.
right? But it is so healing, and so it's a way that she learned how to forgive herself and cope with what she had been through. Um, but Francine Rivers didn't like shy away from the darkness and the reality of what this young woman had been through, right? So I agree. I think there's great ways to do it that would help people cope through that. Yeah.
Right. And when I read Redeeming Love, I think I was like 17 or 18, and I was like so creeped out by it. I was like, this is like a dirty book. I thought this was a Christian book, and I was
Yeah.
um, but it wasn't written for me. You know what I mean? And I've heard so many other women share their story of like, wow, to see somebody that went through all of that and did all of that and just was forgiven and have them to be a hero of a story that's still deserving of like a pure and righteous love was like so beautiful and like freeing for them. So I'm like, hey, I'm not gonna knock it, man. I'm not the intended audience, And so I like more power to Francine Rivers, like God bless her ministry, but probably not something that I'm gonna write. So
Yeah.
everybody's got their calling.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Her books, the reason that she made them that way is because of her own story, right? And so everyone has a unique story to tell, and that's what makes books so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, books really are just connection with another human.
Yeah.
And you're reading my book, you're reading things from my heart and from my mind, and you're also reading about, 100 other people that I've loved and interacted with and known. over the years that have gotten little pieces of them are written into the characters. So you just, yeah, you get so much of people that you wouldn't maybe get otherwise when you read a book. It's amazing.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, what are your favorite ways to find community?
Ooh, my favorite ways to find community. Whew, right now I'm so busy. So I'm
Yeah.
doing business networking, but I wouldn't say that's like real. And I think real relationships could develop from it. But it's definitely like business focused. So I'm feeling myself getting a little bit like I'm actually very extroverted, but I've had tons of meetings with people, and so I'm getting a little bit tired. But for me, when I was younger, like college, high school, um, this is kind of the formula that I found. If you find yourself in a position where you don't have a best friend or you don't have like a friend group around, maybe they moved away, maybe you moved away, maybe life just circumstances changed, is just to identify like 5 or 6 people, specifically usually other women if you're a woman, because it's good to have other women around us. It's a really healthy thing.
Mhm.
And just like invite them to do something, invite them to go to the gym or go for a walk or go get coffee or whatever, and then see who reciprocates. And then, exchange back and forth. And then after, a few months, you'll probably end up with at least one really good friend out of that. And I know that sounds like really basic, but sometimes we don't always do that. Sometimes we just sit at home and we're like, how come I don't have any friends? And really
Mhm.
anybody can find themselves in that circumstance. It's just a life circumstance. And so, and we don't live in a village anymore where you just know your neighbors. And so we have to be really intentional about it. I've lived in my city for, I mean, almost 35 years, my whole life. So, we're part of a really amazing home Bible study community that we've been doing for 5 years and are really close with the people in that group, and have a few really special girlfriends that live here. And one of my best friends lives in Colorado, I told you. And so we try to see each other at least once a year and catch up on the phone, when we can and stuff, and just be intentional. But yeah, just put yourself in a position where you're going to be around people and be intentional about seeking out those relationships and find people
Mm.
that are kind too. I think when I was younger, I always wanted to be with the cool group. You like look around the room and you're like, oh, all those people are all hanging out together and they're laughing, and I want to be over there, right? Because it's how I am. I like being in the middle of things. But I think the older I've gotten, the more I've realized like that's cool to be part of the club or part of like the clique. But really, the most important thing is just finding somebody who's nice, like who's gonna be like excited for you and you're excited for them, and there's not jealousies, and you're kind to each other, and you actually care when the other person's sick, and you bring each other soup, and like life is good. And those are the kind of friends we all need, and those are the kind of friends I want to be to people and have
Yeah.
in my
Yeah. Someone who's thoughtful.
yeah.
Mm. So my last question for you is, are there any new projects coming up? And it sounds like there is with this book that you just signed for. Is that what you're talking about?
I did just sign, and I'm not really supposed to talk about it, I don't think. But I can tell you that I signed. So I just signed for a new fantasy standalone novel. It's all written, and I'm just in revisions right now with my editor. So really excited
Okay.
about that. Come out early 2025. So maybe February, we'll see.
Nice.
So far
Yeah.
away actually, so there should be cover reveals and blurbs and things coming up soon, and I'm really
Yeah.
excited to share it. So it's very
Yay.
real, but it's very weird magic system because that's what comes out of my brain. So yeah.
Well, sometimes you need a weird magic system. Sometimes the same old doesn't cut it, right? Sometimes you just need something new. Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed some of the things that you had to say, like that clean fantasy really isn't something, it's kind of a hard phrase right now, right? Sparks a lot of argument, but you have a great answer to that. So thank you. And your book, super fun. Loved all of the ideas behind it. So thanks for sharing that and your heart in that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for reading it, Addison. And this is so cool that you're doing this podcast. I love to see this, and I'm excited to see who you have on next. I listened to Lindsay Franklin's interview with you, and so Yeah, super cool. Can you tell me a little bit about the name behind it? It's called Lonely Girl Podcast, right?
Yeah. So when I was little, I had a really hard time making friends. And so I would read. But I also was like super introverted and I was going through a lot with my health. So it made sense why I didn't have a lot of friends. But what I realized is that there's like so much loneliness right now because of social media. We have kids who don't know how to make friends because all they have is just this screen in their face that shows you like other people's highlight reels. And then you're like, oh, well, are they really my friend if they didn't invite me to the mall? And like stuff like that, just like insecurities that make you feel lonely. And so I made this podcast to show people that there are really good ideas and solid characters and books out there that we should be supporting, and kind of encouraging people to build a community through their passions, like what I'm doing right now with interviewing people like you. So it kind of has two purposes: to support other people's books, but also to show people how to create a community themselves so they're not actually a lonely girl. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely chronic illness can be, I don't know how we're doing on time, but it can be such a lonely, lonely time. When I was at my sickest, probably
Yeah.
like 17 to 2020. I had such a hard time getting out to see people, and books were so important for me because, again, it's that human connection that we all need. And then actually, some online communities were really awesome for
Yeah.
me. Even though I know social media can be a dark place, sometimes, there can be different like Facebook groups or whatever that are
Hmm.
together intentionally to support each other. And I've met some really lovely people through that. And when I just needed someone to talk to, also.
Yeah.
And then also during that time, like not being afraid to like just reach out to church resources, because sometimes I think you go to
Hmm.
church, like, there's 1,000 people there and you're like, what do I do? But during that time, we had like some elders in our church that we reach out to just for prayer, and they came and prayed over us. And we just have connection with people that way. And it didn't have to be something even like a reciprocal friendship, because I sometimes didn't even have energy for that, but just receiving from the body, even in our weakness, and being vulnerable enough to ask for that.
Yeah.
It was really, really valuable for us during that season. So, yeah,
Hmm.
that's all I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah. There's power in recognizing that you're not alone. And I feel like just getting to know people, but also I feel like we use YouTube and podcasts and social media to connect with people that we relate to, right? And so if this podcast could show someone that there's someone else out there that struggles like they do to help them not feel alone, then to me, that's worth it, even if it's just one person. And that's what your stories do. People like you and Lindsay, they make people feel less alone. So I don't know. Yeah.
So that's so encouraging to hear, because sometimes you put your book out in the world and you're like, here we go. Hopefully this does something. So thanks for sharing that. It's really encouraging. And
Yeah.
And that's a wrap, guys. I hope you were blessed by this episode as much as I was having Rachelle on my podcast. I really thank you for watching this, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would please engage with this video and let us know that you're interested in our content. You can hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification button so you never miss one of our videos. Also, please share with someone that you think would be interested in this story or in Rachelle's story. And lastly, don't forget to like it and comment if there's someone that you would like to have on the podcast. I would love to see who you guys are reading and maybe get them on for you. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.